the beginning of this 2026 year, we're opening our seminar series of the Structural Development Macroeconomics Research Group. And today we have the pleasure of having the leader of the group, Professor José Luis Oreiro from the University of Brasilia. And he will be talking a little bit about measuring technological backwardness of middle and low income countries. I'm not alone today, so let us introduce Professor Oreiro, bring him to the stage, and also my dear friend Chiara Grazzini, that is joining us from Italy. Hi, Chiara. How are things in Italy these days?
Hi, hello. Oh, it's okay. It's cold, but now it's a pleasure for me to attend the first seminar of the new session of the seminar of the group, and also to attend the lesson of Professor Oreiro. So
Amazing.
thank you for the opportunity to join you.
Professor Oreiro, again, thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned, he will be talking about measuring technological backwardness in middle and low-income countries. So, Professor, the floor is yours. I hope the weather is treating you well. It's a beautiful summer in Brazil. And we're looking forward to hear the results of your paper.
Well, thank you very much, Marwil. Thank you, Chiara. Well, talking first about the weather.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, in Brazil, it's raining.
Okay.
And we had, well, for me, it's a very comfortable temperature.
Okay.
It's low 20 degrees Celsius, I believe 19. So it was raining up to a few minutes ago. But for me, it's a very pleasant weather, mainly to present a webinar. So I do not sweat. So it's
Great.
fantastic to to present or to work in this weather. So the idea of this new format of the the webinars is to present papers that are already published, trying to share the ideas, to share knowledge between the members of our group or students or professors in other institutions that may be interested in what we research. So my presentation today will be based mainly on my article published in 2022 in PSL Quarterly Review, but I add a flavor in this presentation in order to get the big picture, okay? Because this article is a piece in a research agenda of new developmentalism and the structuralist development of macroeconomics. So that's why I have added some theoretical information that is more general or more broad regarding our school of thought. So the name of my presentation is Structural Heterogeneity and the Wealth of Nations, a detailed analysis of employment quality and international income differences in new developmentalist framework. I'm convinced that the paper in which this webinar is based is a new framework, a new empirical framework, in order to address what is, in my view, the fundamental problem of economic development, which is the immense gap of income per capita between countries. Is basically since the time of publication of Adam Smith's book Wealth of Nations, the question that really matters for economists or for people that research in economics. Okay, so the motivations, I will start with the basic, the motivations and the contributions to the development literature. Well, the problem to be analyzed by any serious researcher on economic development is the persistence of vast income per capita differentials between developed and developing nations remains the most profound challenge in economic science. Historically, mainstream economic thought has oscillating between emphasizing capital accumulation and focusing on institutional quality as the primary determinants of wealth. However, my work with my co-authors that I'm presenting today, especially embodied in the 2022 paper of the PSL Quarterly Review, analyzes regarding technological backwardness, offers a radically different perspective rooted in the structuralist and new developmentalist traditions. So the primary motivation behind this research is to identify the mechanisms of the middle income trap, a phenomenon where developing countries, particularly in Latin America and portions of Asia, experience premature deindustrialization and subsequent stagnation in their catching up process with the technological frontier. I think that this problem is also important today for parts of South and South East Europe, mainly Spain or Italy, that are suffering from exactly the same problem. Okay, so our seminal contribution in this paper lies in the conceptualization and empirical application of the so-called employment quality index and employment quality gap. By shifting the analytical focus from aggregate productivity measures to the actual composition of the workforce across different technological intensities, we provide a concrete metric for measuring technological backwardness. Our research demonstrates that per capita income gap between developing nations and the global frontier, that in our paper is represented by the United States, is fundamentally explained by the structural distribution of labor. Unlike neoclassical models that often treat technology as an exogenous residual, the famous solar residual, or the measure of our ignorance, our work endogenizes technological progress by linking it to the quality of employment and the productive structure. Well, motivations. Furthermore, our work provides a bridge, and I think there is one distinct characteristic of the structuralist macroeconomic development group, is to link macroeconomic policy, specifically the management of the exchange rate, and the issue of the structural change. In general, even between heterodox economists, macroeconomics is distinct from economic development and structural change. I think there is a specific mark or a specific feature of this research group is precisely to show the link between macroeconomics, which is treated mainly as a short-term problem, with structural change and economic development. Well, this paper contributes to the literature by proving that price competitiveness is insufficient for development if not accompanied by non-price competitiveness, which is derived from technological sophistication. By utilizing state-of-art econometric techniques, such as system generalized methods of moments, and validate the core of tenets of new developmentalism, we show how industrialization policies can be adopted in developing countries in order to reduce the per capita income gap. Okay, so what is the central question of development economics? Is, as I already told, explaining the international income gaps. In the context of the theory of economic growth, the so-called proximate causes of development are those traditionally identified as the availability of physical and human capital, natural resources, and the efficiency of resource use. However, the so-called ultimate or fundamental determinants refers to the reason why countries differ so drastically in their ability to accumulate those factors and to use them in efficient or productive way. We address the central question of income gaps by positing that the primary source or the primary cause of income differentials is structural heterogeneity. We argue that the divide between rich and poor countries is the cumulative result of differences in compound growth rates over long periods, a process that became prominent with the Industrial Revolution. Developed countries are those that successfully concentrated their economic activities in manufacturing, which allowed for the exploitation of increasing returns to scale, often referred to the Verdun effect or called or Verdun effect, and the rapid accumulation of human capital through learning by doing. Conversely, developing nations remain trapped in a dualistic economic structure where a small modern sector coexists with a large low productivity subsistence or traditional sector, which today increasingly manifests also in service activities. Okay, the core of our argument is what a country produces matters. Our analysis suggests that the international income differentials are a direct function of the technological sophistication of a nation's productive base. When the workforce is concentrated in activities with low added value or low technological intensity, the resulting income per capita is necessarily lower. This structural stagnation is identified as the root of the middle income trap. So we have a table here that typifies our main theoretical concepts. We have basically four sectors. We have the high-tech manufacturing, medium-tech manufacturing, low-tech or primary sector, and the traditional services. Regarding the differences in value added, high-tech manufacturing had a high value added, medium-tech manufacturing moderate value added, low-tech or primary sector low value added, and traditional services low value added. Regarding technological intensity, of course, the high-tech manufacturing is a sector with high technological intensity, medium tech, the moderate technological intensity, low tech and primary sector, low technological intensity, and traditional sector, traditional services had negligible technological intensity. The growth contribution, well, the engine of long-term growth is the high-tech manufacturing. Medium-tech manufacturing can also facilitate transition to a high-income economy and complexity. Low-tech primary sector had subject to external, made the economy subject to external constraints, mainly the balance of payment constraints, and the traditional services is often or are often a refuge for underemployment, or using the John Robinson's terminology, disguised unemployment. Okay, so let's talk a little about the theoretical framework that in which our paper is based. Our analysis is firmly situated within the New Developmentalist Research Program, also known as the São Paulo Consensus. This name was given by Robert Boyer on a review that he made on a book that Professor Brasser published in 2009 in France called Globalisation et Compétition, in English, Globalization and Competition. But that's in this review, Robert Boyer created this term, Consensus of São Paulo, or São Paulo Consensus. Well, this school of thought is a contemporary synthesis that brings together classical development economics, Latin American structuralism, and post-Keynesian macroeconomics. And can be also seen as the synthesis of classical and modern heterodoxy or developmentalism. Neo-developmentalism retains the structuralist insight that economic development is a process of structural change characterized by the continuous transfer of labor to sectors producing more technological, sophisticated goods and services. It draws heavily on the Caldorian tradition, which views the manufacturing industry as the engine of growth because of its capacity to generate technological spillovers and improve overall productivity through backward and forward linkages. However, neo-developmentalism also adds a macroeconomic dimension that was often secondary in old developmentalism. This dimension, let me see, this dimension focuses on the role of strategic macroeconomic prices, the exchange rate, interest rate, wage rate, inflation rate, and profit rate in facilitating or hindering structural change. Specifically, my framework presented in this paper emphasizes that the chronically overvalued exchange rate is a fundamental barrier to development because it renders technological sophisticated phenomenon of premature industrialization. Oops. Well, let me talk a little about the trend toward the exchange rate overvaluation. A unique proposition of this framework is the identification of tendency towards the cyclical overvaluation of the exchange rate in middle-income countries. This overvaluation is driven by two main factors: the Dutch disease, which is caused by the export of natural resources that appreciate the currency, and the growth of foreign savings strategy, which attracts capital inflows but leads to debt and loss of industrial competitiveness. Our work serves to bridge these macroeconomic distortions with the structural outcome of a widening technological gap. Okay, well, I think it is important also to stress the differences or the advances that this approach had over traditional neoclassical approach. Our approach adopted represents a significant advancement over the neoclassical growth models that have dominated mainstream economics, including the exogenous models of Solow and Swan and the endogenous models developed by Homer, Lucas, Aghion, and Howitt. Regarding the critique to the Solow-Swan exogenous framework, in the traditional Solow-Swan model, economic growth is determined by the accumulation of capital and labor, with technological progress being treated as an exogenous residual or total factor productivity. This model assumes, and it's important, this model assumes that all countries have access to the same global pool of technology, and will eventually converge to the same steady-state level of income per capita, provided that they have similar saving rates. Our analysis advances this by demonstrating that technology is not a manna from heaven that falls equally on all nations. Instead, technological capacity is intrinsically linked to the employment structure. By introducing the employment quality gap, we show that technological backwardness is a measurable structural deficiency rather than a missing parameter in a production function. Our empirical findings refute the neoclassical idea of unconditional convergence by showing that without structural change toward high-tech sectors, the income gap remains persistent regardless the capital accumulation levels. So, the second class of models is the so-called endogenous growth theories. The main authors are Paul Romer, Robert Lucas, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt. attempted to internalize technological change by focusing on research and development investments in human capital. While these models recognize that innovation is intentional, they often suffer from several limitations that our approach overcomes. Regarding human neoclassical endogenous models, for instance, Lucas, that treat human capital as a generic input, we argue that the quality of jobs available in the economy determines whether human capital is used effectively or wasted in low productivity sectors. In Brazil, it's very common for us to use the example of engineers that lost their jobs during the 2014-2016 crisis and have to work as Uber drivers. So that's precisely a question, an issue that the traditional neoclassical endogenous growth models with human capital simply does not address. The question of the quality of jobs, not only the human capital. And there is also the problem of homogeneity. Endogenous growth models often assume a degree of homogeneity in production function of ideas. Our framework, influenced by evolutionary economics, emphasizes the brutal difference in learning and capacity accumulation between producing potato chips and microchips, to use a quote of Gabriel Palma. It's completely different. Okay, and we have also the problem of policy neutrality. Neoclassical models often conclude that market forces will drive innovation. Our work proves that macroeconomic prices, especially the exchange rate, can deactivate a country's innovative capacity by making its industrial base unprofitable, a variable that is largely absent in Romer-style endogenous growth models. Well, the next question is, well, we are presenting a new model or a new theory. In the end of the day, a theory is so good as its explanatory power. So the question is, does our approach explain more? A central question is the evaluation of our research is whether the structuralist neodevelopmentalist model explains a larger proportion of international income differentials than neoclassical models. The evidence suggests that it does, primarily because it addresses the structural residuals that neoclassical models simply cannot account for. Neoclassical models, by focusing on capital per worker, often leave a massive portion of the income gap unexplained. This is the aforementioned solo residual. Me and my co-authors explicitly test our model against these traditional variables. In our econometric analysis, we control for the amount of capital per worker, which is a typical neoclassical variable, and find that even when capital is accounted for, the employment quality gap remains a significant and dominant predictor of income levels differences. When we perform the composition of the variance of the per capita income gap, the statistical tests reveal that, first, conditional convergence explains a portion of the variance but fails to close the gap for most developing nations. But the employment quality gap generates more variability in the per capita income gap than the variability generated by the capital stock gap per worker. This demonstrates that the composition of the productive structure is more potent or more powerful explanation for why countries are rich and poor than simply the amount of capital invested in those countries. Neoclassical models assume that capital leads to technology. We prove that without a high-quality employment structure, capital accumulation is insufficient to close the income gap. So we have here a comparison between explanatory variables, which is the result in neoclassical models, and which is the result in our in our article. Regarding the capital stock, in neoclassical models, capital stock per worker, this variable is significant but leaves a large residual. In our model, in our paper, this variable is significant but less influential than structure. Human capital in neoclassical models assumed to increase productivity. In our model, only effective if high-tech jobs exist. Productive structure in neoclassical models are ignored or can be taken as secondary. In our model is a primary determinant of income gap. And the explanatory proportion in the neoclassical result is low because mainly the large share of income per capita differentials are explained by TFP, which is the measure of our ignorance, but in our model is high because employment quality gap captures structural technology differences. Well, so the main innovation is this index, the employment quality gap as a new metric. In order to calculate the employment quality gap, we first have to calculate the employment quality index. Okay, and the employment equality index is between the share of the workforce in high technological intensity sectors and the share of workforce in medium and low technological intensity factors. So that's the formula for calculating the EKI. Is the EKI for country E in period C. On numerator side, we have the summatory value, the sum of the portion of the share of workforce employed in each of high tech sectors in the economy. And in the denominator, we have the summatory of the share of labor employment in each of the low tech sectors and each of the medium tech sectors. So it's not it's very straightforward, the concept and how to calculate it. Okay, well, but the employment quality index is fundamental to calculate the employment quality gap, which is our second innovation. The employment quality gap is calculated defining some country as a benchmark. Okay, so the idea here, I think that the idea of the employment or the employment quality gap is that there is some country or some sector which is the technological frontier. This idea came from Fagerberg, okay, from his work on why growth rates differ. So, using the same idea of Fagerberg, we still consider the United States to be the technological frontier. So, the sectors in the US economy, medium, high, and low, are considered to be the benchmark in order to calculate the EKG. So, the EKG is simply the employment quality index of the sectors in the US economy compared in ratio to the employment quality gap or employment quality index of any other country in the same period. Okay, and the idea is that this employment quality gap has to be positive, of course, and also larger than 1. Okay, so what is the difference between what we are doing and the other heterodox approaches, for instance, the Thero's balance of payments constrained growth model? Well, there is some similarities and some differences. What is similar between our approach and the approach of balance of payments constrained growth model is that both models agree that the natural rate of growth in an open economy is often constrained by the balance of payments. And both approaches reject the neoclassical focus on supply-side inputs, arguing that demand and external equilibrium are the real constraints on growth. Well, but also exist key differences and advancements. The major difference lies in how non-price competitiveness is treated. In Thero's original model, the growth rate is determined by the ratio of income elasticities of exports and imports. We advance this by endogenizing the elasticities through the productive structure. We argue that income elasticities are not data of nature, but are the result of the employment quality index. So a country with a high employment quality index will naturally have a higher income elasticity of exports because it produces sophisticated goods the world wants, and a lower income elasticity of imports because it doesn't need to import high-tech goods. Thus, we provided the structural mechanism that explains the parameters used in Thero's law. Furthermore, we place a much greater emphasis on exchange rate than Thero. Thero often argued that relative prices have little effect on long-term growth. We argued that while they may not affect the growth rate directly in a stated sense, they affect it indirectly by determining whether the productive structure and those elasticities can improve or will deteriorate through the industrialization. Well, now to the econometric part. I think that is the really contribution of the paper. First of all, how econometric results are robust in comparison with the state of the art. The econometric analysis conducted in our paper is exceptionally robust in the adherence to the state of art in international panel data econometrics. We use a system of GMMM, which is generalized methods of moments estimator, specifically following the Arellano-Bover 1995 paper and Blundell and Bond's 1998 paper procedures. This method is essential for development studies because, first, we have genetic control. It addresses the problem that income levels and structural quality are mutually dependent. Second, we can deal with dynamic panel bias. It corrects for the bias inherent in models that include lagged dependent variables, which is standard in growth convergence studies. And finally, the issue of variable persistence. System GMM is specifically designed for cases where variables like income and capital stock are highly persistent and standard. GMM is the first difference might perform poorly. Okay. Regarding the drivers of the income gap, the econometric results provide empirical validation for the structuralist hypothesis through the coefficients estimated by the system GMM method. In the complete model, which in the paper is model 4, used to explain the per capita income gap, all explanatory variables are statistically significant at 1% level, confirming their validity in driving international income disparities. So, regarding conditional convergence, the econometric test shows a coefficient of 0.922, demonstrates a high degree of income persistence, indicating that current income gaps are heavily influenced by a country's historical distance from the frontier. Here we have a mechanism of path dependence in the econometric tests. Regarding the capital stock gap, the variable exhibits a coefficient of 0.436, confirming that difference in physical capital per worker remain a significant proximate cause of the income gap. And regarding our specific contribution, which is the employment quality gap, the structural technological gap has a coefficient of 0.278, indicating a direct and positive relationship with income gap, as the quality of employment diverges from the benchmark, income levels drop accordingly. Well, going deeper on the econometric coefficient analysis in order to see the drivers of the income gap. The most striking finding of the analysis arising from the comparison between the magnitude of these coefficients and their explanatory power regarding variance. Although the capital stock gap coefficient is larger than the employment quality gap coefficient, the variance decomposition shown in table A6 of the article reveals that employment quality gaps explains almost 30% of the variability in the per capita income gap, whereas the capital stock gap explains only a little more than 5% of this variance. This statistical discrepancy proves that structural heterogeneity, the distance from the technological frontier in the labor market, is a much more powerful factor in explaining the differences in wealth between nations than simple deficiencies in capital stock. Furthermore, we analyzed the determinants of employment quality gap itself as a dependent variable in equation 4 of the article. The results show that human capital, coefficient of minus 4.14, and economic complexity with minus 2.54 are the primary drivers in reducing the structural gap, followed by the bilateral real exchange rate, which showed a significant negative coefficient, meaning that a competitive, which means devalued, exchange rate induces a reduction in technological backwardness. Well, the work passes the most rigorous diagnostic checks required for GMM validation regarding the Hansen test of joint invalidity. The p-values for the Hansen test, example 0.4955 in table 1, indicates that instruments used are exogenous and the model is correctly specified. The Arellano bond AR2 test, we find no evidence of second order correlation. The p-value is around 0.29, confirming that the moment conditions are valid and the residuals are not biased. And the Weidmeiser finite sample correction, we apply the Weidmeiser 2005 correction, which is critical state-of-the-art step to ensure that standard errors are not underestimated in two-step GMM procedures. So the results obtained from the GMM system model show that when endogeneity is controlled, the coefficients for the employment quality gap and the capital stock per worker gap actually increase in significance. This provides extremely solid econometric foundations for our theoretical claims. Well, now the last part of my presentation, which is not exactly in the paper, but I think there is it's an implication for the paper, is economic policy prescription, and I analyzed two cases, Brazil and Spain. Okay, our work provides clear and urgent policy prescription for countries seeking to escape the middle income trap or reverse the industrialization. First, the case of Brazil. The problem of Brazil is to escape the middle income trap. For Brazil, which we identify as a primary example of premature deindustrialization and the overvalued exchange rate trap, the prescriptions are as follows. First, it is necessary to neutralize the Dutch disease due to implementation of an export tax on primary goods to prevent commodity booms from appreciating the currency to levels that destroy manufacturing. We have also to target the technological gap. Well, this result is not presented in this paper, but in another paper, but I think that's important for policy prescription, since more or less 60% of Brazil's industrialization is technological. Simply changing the exchange rate is not enough. Brazil needs an active industry and science policy to shift the workforce back into high-tech sectors. And inflation targeting flexibility. Well, as a policy issue that I've been discussing in Brazil in the last 20 years, to be more precise, and maybe for the next 20 years, but introducing greater flexibility inflation targeting to allow for exchange rate adjustments that support the tradable sector. Well, and the strategies for Spain, although Spain is a high-income country, it has exhibited signs of stagnation and loss of industrial dynamism since the 2008 crisis. Our logic suggests the following for Spain. First, structural consolidation of small and medium enterprises. In Spain, 99.8% of Spanish firms are small and medium enterprises with fewer than 10 employees, which curtails productivity. Policies should encourage industrial concentration and scaling up firms into high-tech niches. Second, internationalization and employment quality. Spain needs to move away from a model dependent on tourism and construction toward the non-tourism services like IT, finance, and professional consulting, which have higher technological intensity. And finally, a green transition hub, leveraging Spain's comparative advantage in renewable energy to become a hub for high-tech green manufacturing, thereby improving its position relative to technological frontier. So I have here a table resuming the prescription for both Brazil and Spain. And finally, my final remarks. Structuralist Manifesto for the 21st century. Our research constitutes a powerful structuralist manifesto that challenged the one-size-fits-all prescription of neoclassical growth theory. By meticulously measuring technological backwardness through the lens of employment quality, we have provided a diagnostic tool that is far more accurate than aggregate productivity residuals. For middle-income countries like Brazil and advanced nations like Spain, the quality of employment is the ultimate frontier of development. Our work confirms that a competitive exchange rate is the gatekeeper of its structural change, but it is the industrial and technological policies that must lead the way through the gate. With solid econometric foundations and profound theoretical insights, our analysis provides the scientific justification for a new era of national development strategies based on productivity sophistication and, more important, technological sovereignty. Is this that I have to present? Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Oreiro, for a very clear and on-time presentation, very stimulating presentation. I think we can open the floor for some questions. Perhaps, Chiara, anything you would like to points that you would like to raise, perhaps, and we can have a little discussion around this paper.
Yeah, thank you, José, for your interesting presentation. I like it. I have 4 short questions for you about your paper. First of all, if I understand correctly, during the presentation you stress a lot the concept of heterogeneity or structural heterogeneity, no? And you say that the employment quality index and the employment quality gap measure the technological sophistication. But could they be considered also a proxy of the structural heterogeneity? Because in particular, the employment quality index measures the share of workers in technology-intensive sectors, no? Respect the share of employment in low and medium technology-intensive sector. So the first one. And the second, if I understand correctly from your paper, the data come from the World Input-Output database, no?
I think so. I'm not the guy that performed the econometric tests.
Okay, but I read your paper. So. Because was...
Yes, just to emphasize one thing. This concept I created in a previous paper, just published in Portuguese in 2019. So I have this idea of create an index of employment quality, and then use the index to explain the differences in income per capita. So
Mhm.
so I created the concept, but in this article 2019, and but we used a much smaller database in order just to trying to see if the concept is relevant, and the preliminary results was very good for a small database. And then I amplified the database, and call other people to work with me, and that's the paper that I'm showing today.
Yeah, yeah, no, because it was very interesting because in your paper I read that also Roderick, I don't remember, I read Roderick in 2016 used the
Hmm.
same database that that contain a variable that allow for dividing workers according to the type of, of skills in high skilled workers, medium skilled workers, and low skilled workers. You know,
But
it's
I
been
think that it's different, because here I'm not dividing workers on based on their skins. I'm dividing the jobs. Okay, the division in terms of technological intensity is based in sectors of the economy. Okay, so of
Mhm,
course
yeah,
that
yeah.
we are presuming that in high tech sectors they employ high skilled workers. Maybe or maybe not. Not necessarily, but so that we are not doing the same as Hodrick. Okay, we are not
Yeah, yeah, I know,
dividing.
but could be interesting also divide the share of high skilled workers in manufacturing sector for evaluating the quality now of the employment. Just an idea that I
I
get from your paper.
I do not think. Well, I have difficulties with this idea, because um, the idea is that productivity. I think there's one important difference between the neoclassical human capital approach and this structuralist approach. Okay, the idea is that productivity is not embodied in the people and in the worker. Is the productivity depends on what job the worker is performing. Okay, so of course that you cannot have in a modern economy, uh, for instance, a person that cannot read or write. Yeah? But people with, say, medium levels of education can work in high tech in manufacturing industries if they have the training to do so. They do not. A worker in a factory in China that makes, for instance, uh, electricity cars does not have to have a PhD in economics or finance. Okay, so just to be a worker that have good formal education, but it is not necessary to be a PhD. So of course that PhDs will be working on this kind of
Yeah,
manufacturing
yeah.
industry, in designing, so on and so forth, but not on the production line. So I think that is is the characteristic of our approach, and it's different from the human capital, is that what matters is where the worker is performing his activity, because where the worker is performing his activity, each is what will bring a high productivity to him or to her. That's the point.
Okay, okay. Like just because it was an idea that I received when I read your paper, but just a curiosity. And my last comment is regarding the model because you test the effect of the employment quality gap on the income gap, but also then you endogenize the employment quality gap. So,
Yeah.
did you
Yes.
think of using the simultaneous equation system, for example? Because in this way you can consider no the the effect of the you can endogenize in the employment quality gap and introduce it as a control variable in the equation of the per capita income gap directly. You can
Okay.
control for the reverse causality.
Well, I prefer to choose a strategy that I have used today 20 years ago when I have a paper in Portuguese. I was the first one, but unfortunately the paper was published in Portuguese. But the paper that I endogenized, firstly, the income elasticities of exports and imports of Theore's model, and I used this two-step approach. First, we calculate the income elasticities of exports and imports of a sample of countries. Okay,
Mhm.
and so the econometric model gives the income elasticities, and we do a second step in which we make a regression of the estimates of the income elasticity of exports and imports, uh, and we make a second model regressing these estimates with two other variables, which are the 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 technological gap in the sense of Fagerberg. At that
Mhm.
time, 2006, and economic complexity was not so spread in the world. So I think that's a few years after that economic complexity. Uh,
2006, the science paper by Hidalgo. I think
Pardon?
2007. I think
2007. Okay,
Hidalgo was
2007. So
science. Yeah.
the standard variable to analyze differences in countries regarding technology was the technological gap of Fagerbert. So I
Yeah.
use this and the exchange rate. So in this two-step model, we first estimate an income elasticities and then regress the income elasticities against uh, a price variable, which is the exchange rate, and the technological gap. And what we find on this 2006 paper that unfortunately was published in Portuguese, because if I post this in English, I'll be retired by this moment, because it will be the most important paper of the
Mhm.
paradox thought in the 21st century. Unfortunately, I missed the opportunity. But what we find is that for intermediate levels of technological gap, the real exchange rate had a direct influence on the income elasticities of exports and imports in the
Mhm.
direction that a more competitive exchange rate for countries with intermediate levels of technological gap, uh, exchange rate depreciation will increase the income elasticity of exports and decrease the income elasticity of imports. So this standard, this approach, I used 20 years ago, and I decided to use this approach to this model. I do not think when we are working within the article that it could have a different result if we did in this approach that we're suggesting. Maybe or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah,
Perhaps
thank
as a
you.
follow-up for this research agenda to bring some additional robustness to certain findings, Kata's
Yes,
suggestion.
I think that
We
the
can think
research
another
agenda.
paper.
Yes, but I think the research agenda is I inaugurated it well, actually in 2019, but in Portuguese, but now with this paper in 2022. And I really think that workers research on development economics that had a structuralist base must use this kind of approach in order to understand the per capita income differentials, which is basically the most important issue in development economics, is to explain why some countries are rich and why so many countries are poor, and what is the for the wealth of nations. That's
I
the point.
find I find very convincing the idea that creating good jobs is an important part of the development problem, so to speak. And I think the paper does a very interesting job of work putting good jobs at the center of the stage. But while I was reading the paper and again hear your presentation, I was wondering, can we dissociate the process of creating good jobs from the process of capital accumulation? To which extent are we able to dissociate the creation of good jobs and capital accumulation? So that's one thing. And the other thing is how it's related. How do we create these good jobs? Because if it's not capital accumulation alone, or if capital accumulation plays a role but it's a secondary role, how do we create these good jobs? And in your paper, or in the paper, you show also that not only economic complexity appears as an explanation of the employment gap, but also human capital accumulation is pretty significant in explaining again the employment gap. So is it a combination of capital, physical capital, human capital, and economic complexity? Again, I'm repeating myself. How do we create these good jobs?
Well, Marvil, I think that you have the $1 million question.
We need
job, large quantity. Okay, because that's the problem. Okay, it's not difficult to produce good jobs in Luxembourg.
Okay.
If well, Luxembourg is a very rich country, so it's not a country. But the question is how to create very good jobs in very large quantities. And I think, unfortunately, that for the moment, the only answer that I have to give to you is that you have to invest in military defense, is where you can generate good jobs in large quantity.
That creates, for me, more questions that I initially expect. So would you mind elaborating a little bit more on how you see the military or the military complex?
The military complex, first, the military, say for instance, you have imagined how many jobs are required to make aircraft carrier, nuclear aircraft carrier, like the Americans' aircraft carrier, worth more or less $1 billion or more than that. Can be 10 billion. I don't know exactly, but as an aircraft carrier have a crew of 5,000 people. Just the crew of the aircraft carrier. You have a lot of people that must have good training for just operate the aircraft carrier. But then you can imagine the backward and forward linkages that exist on the production of an aircraft carrier. Okay, so in steel industry, chemical industry, electronic industry, a lot of things that have inside an aircraft carrier. So it's the only way I see today which we can reindustrialize countries, for instance, Spain and Italy. Okay, Well, it will be much more interesting if we do space colonization, but unfortunately, there is no incentives for this in the moment in the world. And for instance, remember that many of the technological devices that we use today came or from space exploration, like the microwaves, or from the military spending. Internet is a result of the military defense investments.
GPS, blog.
GPS are also, and even the mobile phone, this sensible touch was also came from the military spending. Military spending is a source of funding of technological development. So it creates a lot of jobs, creates very good jobs, and creates many jobs. So if you think that, for instance, the case of Europe, the standard size of the European armies had to increase from more or less 250,000 soldiers to maybe 1 million, or in the case of France, maybe 1.5 million soldiers. And we have to equip them with up-to-date equipment, and it will create millions of jobs in the manufacturing sector and in the high-tech manufacturing sector. So it's the only way that there is always an opportunity in crisis. Mm-hmm. This crisis with Russia can be an opportunity for Europe to reindustrialize and to create these high-quality jobs in great quantity, because that's a problem. In the case of Spain, for instance, there is a company that is specialized in producing ships for the Spanish Royal Navy, that also exports for other countries, is Navantia. Navantia is placed in the city of El Ferrol, in the province of La Coruña in Spain. And I can assure to you that when Spain increases its military budget from less than 2% of GDP to 5% of GDP, the production of Navantia will increase a lot. So it will create jobs in the military defense sector, and is what we have for dinner.
Sure. Clara, I don't know if you have other questions, other comments maybe you would like to raise.
I'm not sure about the last point, because we can create a lot of job in the short term, but we are compromising the other dimension of the sustainable development, if you think, because you think about in the long term. I don't know if it could be a good strategy, because you can create job, but also you need the demand that come from the market for the military equipments. But the high demand means that geopolitical instability, political tension, that creates uncertainty, that reduce investment, because increase the price volatility, the uncertainty on financial markets. So I don't know if could be a possible strategy for
I think
long-term
that is not,
growth.
Chiara, is not a deliberated strategy, is a necessity. I think that is unfortunately what the European countries will do, and mainly after what is occurring in the United States with Donald Trump. Europe has to rearm. It's for its own defense. It can no longer holds on the US protection of the European borders. So I think that this will happen. And in political terms, I think there is unfortunately, easier to justify increasing in military budget than to increase in the investments for greening the economy. And
Yeah, but don't you think like the green agenda or the green transition could be a better alternative or a better option?
could be, but the question is, what's the political
world.
viability? The COP30 in Brazil simply serves nothing. The last COP here that occurred in Belém. What I'm seeing, unfortunately, well, for me, not so much because I'm 54 years old, so I believe that I can live until 90. But so the problem is they will be to you to deal. But I'm seeing a world that is not taking serious actions in order to green the economy, to fight for against the climate change. So what I'm seeing is a world in which there is a crisis of supremacy. United States is no longer the hegemonon of the world. So there is a fighting between powers for whom will be the next hegemonon. And in this contest, what Europe has to do is to rearm, and second, and more important, to make the United States of Europe as soon as it can. Okay, so I think that in political terms, it's easiest to justify and to have the coalitions, political coalitions, to increase the military budget and associated the industrial complex that are required for this rearmament of Europe, than to simple, let's green the economy. I really do not think that the political coalition is strong enough to sustain a development strategy based on cleaning the economy, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for these considerations, Chiara. Unless you have other points, I think it was fantastic. This first seminar, the results that Professor Oreiro shared with us, and this conversation also around different strategies or possible strategies to create new jobs. So good jobs, new jobs, and good jobs. So Chiara, thank you very much for joining us. It's evening for you in Italy right now, I know, and for Professor Oreiro, it's the end of. For me, the afternoon is the beginning. So again, to our friends that are following us, I don't know the day or the time this is happening. I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you again, Professor Oreiro. Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.